All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Green Room. It's part of the Community College series. Really excited to have a friend and a special guest, Webb McKinney, with us today. But before I pass the popcorn over to him to do an introduction, I just want to kind of orient and level set. The Community College project is something that me and a team of folks have been trying to get off the ground. And when you think about community college, those two words, community for a lot of marginalized and underrepresented populations means everything. It's how you came up, you stick together, you learn, you live. And the college part of that, a lot of our parents and previous generations have really emphasized getting a better education so that you could set your future up for better than what your parents and your grandparents and previous generations were able to accomplish. So we are taking the narrative of community college, which has been sometimes seen as a stepping stone to maybe an Ivy League institution or something higher, and saying, no, there's actually power in those two words when you put them together and think about them a little bit differently. So that's the Community College Project, having some good conversations with folks from a wide range of backgrounds and a variety of different experiences. So yeah, with that, I want to pass the microphone over to Webb to give just a couple of minutes of intro. Tell us like where in the world you are, what are you up to these days, and after the intro, we'll jump into some interesting Q&A here. So, Webb, I'll give it over to you.
Hey, well, thank you, Brandon. Well, I'm sitting here in Los Altos, California, which is not too far from Stanford University in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm retired. I worked in high tech for 34 years and retired a few years ago. And I've been spending a fair amount of my time on nonprofit boards, which is how I met Brandon. We're on a board together that's focused on education, getting more people educated and through the school system. And so that's where I'm spending a lot of my time now. And I'm sure we'll get into, more details as we go through this, but that's the big picture.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks for joining. And I think it'll be definitely lots of gems that we unpack and different kind of intricacies about your background. But yeah, first and foremost, from our community to you and your family, thank you so much. Maybe you just start us off and tell us how you're doing. Like that's such a loaded question in times like this. You and your family doing all right? I know we've had a bunch of stuff happen in 2021 and a bunch more stuff happen in 2020. So first question, how are you?
Well, I guess I'm okay, all things considered. What can you say in these days? That we're living in very unusual times. And I think there's a lot more stress and anxiety for everyone, these days for a variety of reasons. And so given all that, my family's doing well. My wife and I have two daughters, and one of them lives in Europe. So we've been unable to see them or to be with them very much over the last year and a half. They have two children. And so we have sort of we've had a Zoom relationship with half of our grandkids. The others are in LA. So we're able to drive down and see them from time to time. But we were all able to get together this summer, and that felt just great. And hopefully we'll be able to see them more in the year ahead with vaccines and tests and things that we didn't have a couple of years ago. But, all things considered, we're doing fine. Thank you.
Yeah. Every day I wake up, I guess everybody's got two choices. Is the glass half full or is it half empty, right? So
yeah,
I try to stay on the glasses half full side myself. And every day I wake up and I can move my arms and legs and, go to the job and do something productive. I feel like it's a good day. So,
well, someone said that the world is full of incredible opportunities disguised as insurmountable problems. So that's the world we're living in. We have a lot of opportunities that we didn't even know we had.
Definitely. Even as you think about like vaccinations, I know that under 12-year-olds are getting ready to potentially be vaccinated. So I've got a 10-year-old myself. So we're like thinking, what's that going to look like? And as a grandpa, you probably be able to empathize with what your kids are dealing with from that perspective as well. So yeah, fingers crossed that we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So you mentioned you're in the Bay Area, Los Altos. Tell us, like, if you take us all the way back to the beginning, like the origin story, like were you born there? Give us a look back into kind of the earlier years of Webb as you were kind of forming and norming. I take us back to 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old.
Sure. By the way, I should have said at the intro, I'm a proud product of the community college system. So that's a part of an important part of the story. I was born in Ontario, California, which is a town that's about 40 miles east of downtown LA. When I was growing up, it was an agricultural community that was becoming an exurb. So the freeways were being built, and it was changing from really a pure agricultural community where oranges were grown and turned into sun-kissed orange juice, and turning into kind of a bedroom community. My father had been killed in World War II several months before I was born. So I was born into this situation where my father had been recently deceased. My mother, and I didn't have any grandfathers either. I had 2 grandmothers and my mother. So I was raised by these 3 women, basically. My mother's mother lived with us until I was 8. They were all very close to me and the family. My mother never remarried or had any other children. So I'm the only child raised by these 3 women. So that I've never quite figured out what that had to do with how I had turned out, but it must have been something. And so I grew up there and went through the public schools, K through 12, went to Chaffey Community College. And then I was fortunate enough to get an academic scholarship to USC, University of Southern California in downtown LA. And so that paid for my tuition. So, with the money that I'd saved up from living at home and going to community college and working and so on, and not having to pay tuition at USC, that allowed me to go to school there. And I got a master's and a bachelor's and a master's in electrical engineering there. Really, it was mostly computer science, but believe it or not, they didn't have that degree then. So it became called computer science. But and so I lived in Southern California until I graduated from college, and then I moved to Northern California, in large part because my mother had a very close friend who lived in the Bay Area, and we used to visit her. This was our idea of a vacation, was to get in the '54 Chevy and drive up 101 and see her friend. And I just loved Northern California. So while as most of my fellow engineering school grads at USC went into aerospace and stayed in Southern California, I moved up here and joined Hewlett Packard in 1969. And that's kind of the end of my early story. I will say, as a kid, the 2 things that I really was passionate about, one was sports, and I loved baseball. I played baseball. I was a pitcher for all the way through school, and I also loved making things, particularly model airplanes. So I spent a lot of time as an only child in my bedroom listening to rock and roll and making airplanes.
Very cool. What did you, so a couple of questions, right? Like growing up, I've heard many stories of, oh, my dad introduced me to computers, or, oh, my uncle, got me into this. Can you remember like how your grandmothers or your mom, or even like the neighborhood that you were in, how did that breed your curiosity about the world of technology that you would soon enter? What was kind of the first thing that kind of sparked that interest?
Honestly, I think when I was 8 years old, my mother put me on an airplane and flew me up to visit this friend of hers in San Francisco. And I was just infatuated with airplanes. Mm-hmm. So I think that just I met the pilot and I got the little wings, and all this stuff like you do. And I just really sort of fell in love with airplanes and then started making these model planes. I think, though, I will say my mother's mother, she was a teacher. Which, she was, this would have been in, I guess, the last, the 1800s, basically, when she first started teaching. And she instilled in me the importance of education and getting an education. So it's one of those things where I just grew up knowing I was going to go to college, and that was just sort of my destiny. And that was all due to her. Yeah. And my mother had gone to college, but not finished. But my grandmother was a college grad, as was my deceased grandfather. And so she just kind of modeled that for me, the importance of education. So for me, I guess I was thinking about, well, if I'm going to go to college, what am I going to major in? And that's where I think just my interest in airplanes and in making things led me to engineering.
Got it. Got it.
There actually were very few engineers in the community I grew up in. As I said, it was mainly an agricultural community. There was one defense contractor in a neighboring town in Pomona, and I knew the father of a friend of mine was the only person I knew who was an engineer. And I did talk to him when I was trying to decide what kind of engineering to go into. He advised me that electrical would provide me with a lot more flexibility than aerospace and some other things. But really, it was just sort of an organic thing, I think.
Yeah. And would you say that you were good at it? Like there's one thing to admire baseball, for example, but I cannot throw a slider or never could do a curveball. And I never hit a ball that's going faster than 70 miles an hour. But
Yeah.
then to think about liking something and then also being good at it, could you reflect on how good you think you were, like when you were getting into engineering? Were you a natural, or did it take some getting used to?
Well, I'll tell you what, I liked, as I said, I liked creating things. I liked the idea of having a career where I made something, a product of some kind. I was good at math. And so I think probably the fact that I was reasonably good at math was an early encouragement. Although my high school counselor, Cleo Martin, he told me I shouldn't go into engineering because I wasn't good enough in math. And that just sort of doubled down my interest in doing it. But when I got into community college, I had a phenomenal calculus teacher. And in those years, at least where I grew up, you didn't get calculus in high school. It was a freshman college thing. And this guy was just inspirational. If you can imagine an inspirational calculus teacher, this guy was it. And he was so enthusiastic, and he made us, even though it was a hard subject, he loved it. I did well at it. So I did well, when I decided this was my path. I did do well in school, which is how I was able to get the scholarship to USC. But yeah, I love physics. I love math, not so much organic chemistry for some reason. So as I went through my engineering curriculum, I did notice there were some classes I didn't like, and I just stopped taking any more of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, you went from community college into USC and then graduated, and then were there internship kind of programs like the way we understand them right now?
Not like now. And in fact, I think that's a tremendous advance, because the reality is in those days you would get out. In my case, I'd been going to school for over 5 years. I got a master's degree. My summer jobs were things like planting lawns, refinishing furniture,
Yeah.
And so when I started out at HP, I wasn't, well, I'd had one finally, before I got my master's, I'd had one summer job at an aerospace company in Southern California, North American Rockwell Autonetics, it was called. And they didn't have any work. Basically, they'd lost the contract on a big missile or something. And people were playing hearts, and they were reading the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I thought, and this guy would stand by the door every day when I checked in, and I had to give him my card and stuff. And I thought, boy, I don't think I want to be an engineer. This is my only experience. And so when I went to HP, I said, well, maybe I'll go into marketing. That sounds interesting. And so I started off actually in marketing at HP for a year, simply because I wasn't sure I really wanted to do engineering work based on this one experience. But then HP was a completely different environment than North America. And it turned out to be a great place to do engineering too.
Yeah. And to think about eyes wide open, I don't know much about this experience, and trying to acclimate. I mentor a few folks who are also kind of newish to corporate America, coming out of school, and you give them your best tips as you can, but things change so quickly underneath our feet that it's hard to know whether you're telling them the right stuff. Did you have any insights or aha moments going from the school setting into the first corporate job? And then did you have any helpful kind of mentors or people that you found that made it easier for you to transition?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, I'll tell you, it felt weird. I mean, you spend all those years in school and you know what school's all about, and then you end up in this corporate setting. And of course, this was a long time ago, but I suspect this hasn't changed too much. It's quite an adjustment. And I remember feeling like I was kind of on another planet. And in particular, people would I'd try to have lunch with people, and they were throwing out model numbers and acronyms. I had no idea what they were talking about.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a specific mentor, but what I did have is that HP hired quite a few students out of university setting that year. So
Mhm.
there were probably a dozen in the division, the business I was working in. There were probably a dozen people like me, and we sort of helped one another, acclimate and develop friendships. And it didn't take too long. I would say for the first year, I was still questioning whether I really wanted to stay in that environment. In fact, actually went back part-time to Stanford, and I was thinking of getting a PhD and becoming a teacher.
Mhm.
And but there was kind of a glut of PhDs, and then I was acclimating, and I thought, hey, this is pretty cool place to work. I did move from marketing into design into the R&D department after the first year, and I really enjoyed designing products for commercial customers, which is what we were doing, and all the new technologies they were getting to use. So I basically never pursued my second career of being a teacher.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're doing some of that now. We sit on the
Yeah,
board of a nonprofit that's doing some good stuff with districts and teachers and students. So
yeah,
this
doing
this
it that way. Yeah,
yeah, we're coming around the back door maybe.
yeah.
Um, so another question about just like acclimating, like your family is like in SoCal. So like, when did it start to feel like home? What was it like building a community up in the Bay Area? And then I imagine HP at the time, right? We know it for printers and ink, and like
Yeah.
it's probably a different kind of way that people were thinking about HP, the company, though, back then when you started.
Well, yeah, I mean, Hewlett Packard in the late 60s, which is when I started, had just introduced their first couple of computers, I think 67, 68. So it was predominantly an instrumentation company. So our products were instruments that other engineers would use to help invent things. So it's kind of, we used to refer to the next bench syndrome, which meant if the engineer sitting next to you liked what you were inventing and used it, then that was the marketing. They said, oh, there's a market for this.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a different world. But I actually went into the part of the instrument business that was going digital first. So the products I worked on were actually computer-based systems. There's a ton of software and algorithmic work going on. So it wasn't the traditional analog instrument. It was kind of the very beginnings of digital instrumentation, and which virtually they all are now. But in those days, you could only do that up to certain frequencies. So our customers were like car companies and people building structures like semiconductor fabs that had to be very stable. So we could only work at low frequencies. That kind of determined who our customers were. But we were using HP's computers in our system. So even though I wasn't in the business of inventing computers, I was using computers to create the solution, and then eventually did go on. I spent most of my career in the computer business, and then I think from a family point of view, I come from a very small family. My mother actually passed away just before we moved up, so my mom and my dad were both gone. I still had these wonderful grandmothers in Southern California, and my wife also came from not a large family. But we had a lot of friends up here. It turns out for some reason, most of my close friends from high school went to Berkeley.
Ah.
And so we spent a lot of time in Berkeley when we first moved up here. And then through HP, and my wife was a teacher, through her friends that she met teaching in elementary school here, we made a lot of good friends. And I didn't think it was socially difficult. And I've always loved the area. So we were excited to be here and to explore the mountains and the beaches and all the the areas that are here.
Yeah, something about engineers and teachers. Like I also studied electrical engineering and married to a teacher. So it's something
Yeah,
about those two personalities coming together.
yeah, I think you're right.
So so you're in and finding community during that time. And also kind of a thing that makes me think about HP, like the oscilloscopes and all of the stuff that you had to do in lab. Like when I was in engineering school,
Yeah,
definitely know exactly what you're talking about when you talk about the instrumentation and like the testing equipment. So, for those who know HP for, the laptops and the desktops and the equipment and the printers and stuff, there is a whole nother universe of
yeah.
that stuff for engineers out there. So
Well, and ultimately, not to get too far into HP, but in 1999, HP had become, 90% of the business was computers of various types. They actually spun off the instrumentation business. So that whole business is now, actually there are two companies, Agilent and Keysight. And that whole part of what was HP when I joined it is now another company. So
Yeah, I know I've got name recognition for Agilent, but the other one not so much. But yeah, good fun fact for anybody that's out there doing computer and technology history.
yeah,
So
small market.
talk about the balancing act. Individual contributor, you started, you're doing a good job at like engineering work, but then I was listening to a book by Patty Azzarello. She's got a couple of them, and that's somebody that shouted you out as an inspiration and somebody that she learned a lot from. So I wonder, like, as you move into leadership and coaching and finding talent and developing it, what kinds of things did people identify in you that helped grow you? And then how was that transition of finding that talent in other people, managing it and helping them to find kind of their best versions of themselves professionally, at least?
Yeah, no, I remember Patty well. So yeah, she's written some good books. What actually happened to me is I had the year in marketing, and that was actually a great place to start because it made me much more, I think, aware of the fact we're doing this technology for a reason. It sounds obvious, but we're building products, and we're only successful if they help customers solve their problems. Yeah. So I found that in R&D, lots of times people get infatuated with the technology and lose sight a little bit of who the customer is. So I think that year in marketing was really helpful. I went into R&D and I absolutely loved it. I mean, it was so much fun. And this was the very beginnings of integrated circuits. And this is before the microprocessor, but what used to be individual transistors, or before that, tubes. Now suddenly you could buy a chip and it had a bunch of different things on it. And so the design world was changing. I was enjoying it. I was getting a chance to do a lot of software too, because of the nature of our business, which I really liked. And then my boss, I guess I was about 3 years after I went into R&D, my boss said, we think you'd be a good manager. How about if you manage a few engineers on the next project? And I remember thinking, well, I'm not sure about this. I mean, I like doing this design. I said to him, well, I'll give it a try. But if I don't like it, can I go back and be a designer again, right? So obviously I liked it because I did that for 28 years in one form or another. So I just enjoyed, I like people, and I like the challenge. It kind of allows you to take your ability and to apply it to have more impact, frankly. If you can get a team of people working together to accomplish something, that's more than you could do all by yourself, for sure, In fact, someone said that instead of org charts, instead of being boxes, they show boxes, they should be gears. And if the person at the top goes like this, there's somebody down here going zing, like that, right? So I think the good side of that, hopefully people up higher making more good decisions than bad, but there's a lot of leverage. It allows you to have actually more impact. And I enjoyed the people side of the business a lot. So I just sort of, in my career in HP was odd because I never really was very consciously pursuing a particular next job. I was just doing what I was doing, and someone would come along and say, hey, how about doing this? And I'd go, oh, that sounds good. So I literally never interviewed for a job after my first one. I was just kind of heads down trying to do it. So I always used to advise people, that's not a bad philosophy. If you spend your time thinking about what your next job is, you may not do a good job at what you're doing. So why don't you do a great job at what you're doing? Even if it isn't exactly what you want, the way to get recognized and to get into what you want to do is to do a good job at what you're doing. And so I sort of progressed in engineering until I became head of a lab, which had maybe 40, 50 engineers. And then I went over to this was right when the PC business was starting, so early 80s. And this is the IBM PC. I think it was either out or about to be out. And HP was trying to figure out, we were already a computer company, but they were mini computers, or servers as they're called today. And it was proprietary technology. It wasn't Intel and Microsoft and Linux and all that stuff didn't exist. So we were trying to get into the PC business, and I went over and became the R&D manager for PCs, and did that for maybe 3 years. And then I got a call, and someone said, how'd you like to go run a business in England? And by now we had 2 daughters, and they were 8 and 10, and it seemed like a good age, reasonable age to move them and have an experience like this. So we went over to the UK for a couple of years, and I ran a software business over there, enterprise software, and then came back and ran another software business in the Bay Area. So came back, we leased our house out, so we knew we wanted to come back.
Yeah.
And so then I did that for a while, and then HP's PC business took a long time for HP to be successful in PCs for a variety of reasons I won't bore you with. But by the mid 90s, HP was starting to have a fair amount of success on the commercial PC side with a Vectra line. And the decision was made to enter the consumer business. So I got another call, and they said, "How'd you like to get us in the consumer business?" And so we created a product line called Pavilion, that you and others may be familiar with, and it actually was very, very successful. And Pavilion, I think, still is the largest consumer PC in the world. So it became really successful. So they always say no good deed goes unpunished. Next thing I know, I'm running the whole PC business. So I ran all of HP's PC business for a few years, and then we got a new CEO from outside HP who decided they wanted to buy Compaq Computer and double the size of HP from 40 billion to 80 billion. And I was asked to run the integration of the two companies. So I spent my last 2 to 3 years at HP sort of knitting together HP and Compaq. And then that seemed like a really good time to retire. So that's when I left and just started thinking about what else I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And it dawns on me, like, these days, a lot of people go from like individual contributor types of roles, and then they say, wait, I need to go to business school in order to like figure out how to be a manager or like how to lead, and like give myself space to think about that. And it sounds to me like what you're saying is that you kind of learned a bunch of this stuff on the job. And one question that comes to mind is like, how did an engineer by trade and nature do so well at running a business, internationally, and then like these big organizations? Are there any insights or any key points in there that were really helpful for you as you transition from like an IC to a leader of leaders?
Yeah, well, I think it was kind of on the job training, basically. I had a lot of wonderful role models. I mean, Hewlett and Packard, and there was HP was just had a very strong and a very good culture, and invested a lot in training people. So, when you joined the company, there was working at HP. If you became a manager, it was managing at HP. And then if you were a second level manager, you had a course there, you built cohorts. The way I met Patty Azzarello is she was in something called the Accelerated Development Program, which was focused on women and minority employees and trying to get them to be even more successful in an environment that was more non-minority and more white, and so more male. And so I was assigned as a mentor to Patty and to others in that program. So there was a huge effort that the company made to get people trained up. And it was just a very, very good culture where people cared about other people. It wasn't just what you did, but how you did it mattered too. So there was a lot of respect and support in that environment. So I think that was unbelievably helpful to me. As you said, I didn't start off knowing how to do this stuff, but they gave you the opportunity to try new things and to learn from it. In fact, I remember a story. There was a guy who ran the LaserJet business at one point, and he made a massive mistake in projecting how many products were going to be sold. And he had a warehouse full of LaserJets, and he got called in front of the board. And this is when Hewlett and Packard were both still on the board. And some of the board members were really angry at him. And Packard said, "Well, Rick," he said, "there's only one thing I want to know from you. What have you learned from this?" Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the attitude. It was okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them. If you made the same mistakes over and over again, that's not so good, right? But, if it was an environment that encouraged risk, which included, let's try somebody doing something they've never done before and see what happens and give them the support they need. So I think it's hard to quantify, but I think that HP culture had a lot to do with why myself and other people like me were able to grow so much on the job.
Yeah, it underscores a point about being an eternal student, and whether it's formal, like in an MBA program, or whether it's, picking up on a podcast or a book from the bookstore and reading it over the weekend and trying to implement some of that stuff when you return to work that next week or that next month. Kind of that cycle of always being
Yeah.
open-minded and
Yeah.
humble about what you don't know yet, so that
Yeah.
you're always looking to improve and looking to learn stuff.
I think that's right. I think I was highly motivated by learning, by trying new things. And I was in an environment that allowed me to do that and to take risks. And I can remember conversations. I remember one time somebody offered me a job and I looked at him and I said, well, this sounds really interesting. Do you realize how unlikely it is that we're going to be successful at this? This was a software product that was ultimately going right after Microsoft, which, the odds of in those days of being successful were not high there. He looked at me and he said, yeah, I know, but I want to give this a try. I said, okay, just as long as you remember this conversation, I'll see what I can do.
Yeah.
So I think that's right.
Yeah. And one other thing you said, let me know that there might have been an early version of kind of the inclusion and diversity and equity conversation that's been going on in tech for a long time. Like when you mentioned kind of getting linked up with Patty, it seemed to be like a recognition that we want to give opportunity and access and, just a chance to folks that sit outside of the mainstream, at least inside of HP. So could you talk about like how HP maybe as a company, or even now, like how we as a technology industry or broader society might think about how to build those systems that you talked about. Like if you're a leader on top, how we can build those things so that all the gears underneath can make for something that's better than what we've got right now. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the most important thing is to actually really care, right? I mean, if the CEO, if the top management is doing something just to say it, or just because there's so much written now about the big tech companies and what a poor job they're doing in this area, and they're all saying, "Oh, we're going to fix that." Well, I have no idea. I'm not in any of these companies. I hope they're serious about it. But at HP, it was serious. It came from the top. We wanted a diverse workforce. And so we tried to understand it's not just hiring people, it's making sure you're creating the environment where they can succeed. And so this isn't easy stuff. I don't want to say that HP, had the key and solved it, but I think we made tremendous progress in increasing the diversity of our workforce and in the success and getting people promoted and so on for the right reason. It was very much a meritocracy. We weren't promoting people because of their ethnicity or gender. We're promoting them because of their capability. But if people don't get the training and the focus and the support that they need, they're less likely to have that opportunity. So we had a lot of programs that we ran. And I remember, I'll tell you a real eye opener for me. I remember was that there was a woman working for me, African-American woman, who ran the notebook business at the time. And she had an ethnic Chinese R&D manager. And I got this call from her. Her name is Diana. And I said, she says, well, we need to talk. We're going to lose Frank. I said, what do you mean we're going to lose Frank? She said, Frank has decided to leave. I said, why? She said, well, let's talk. So it turns out, he said, when I look up at the top of this company, I don't see any people who look like me. And I don't think I can continue to advance here because no one has. And so here I am with an old white guy with an African-American woman trying to convince this Chinese guy to stay. That there was a chance, And so, that was happening in this environment, I think, when we were putting a lot of focus. But it has to be, I understand that, as given my background, when I looked up, I saw Bill and Dave. So the thought never occurred to me until I had some of these conversations with other people. Oh, I guess I have an advantage, because I look like Bill and Dave. And the advantage was, it never occurred to me that I couldn't, accomplish, right? That nothing would get in my way. But if you look up and you don't see anyone like you, it's pretty natural to think maybe I can't make it in this place. So there's a lot of work that has to go into solving this problem. I will say one thing I find really surprising, and it has to do with women in software. Because when I was at HP, we had a lot of women in software. In fact, you wouldn't find a lot of women doing mechanical engineering, or not as many double E's. but I would say a very healthy percentage of our programmers were female. And then as I read today about how toxic the environment can be for women in software, that unfortunately there's something that's gone in exactly the wrong direction.
Mhm. Yeah, it's what you speak of is really true on a lot of different levels in terms of like when you look up inside of your organization and you like being a person maybe that have made it, um, you have certain feelings about your probability of getting to that next level, and then certainly about getting all the way to the top. But then you, in the position that you're in, like if I look at myself, there are people from my high school and from my neighborhood that I grew up in that kind of see me as one of the only data points that
Yeah,
they're looking up to. So it's always like this
yeah,
chain of forward and backwards, and you're always trying to advance yourself forward a little bit, and then also trying to make sure that there's enough breadcrumbs and enough of a strategy and a playbook and an open line of communication for folks that want to mimic the things that you're doing. So yeah, these days I find myself juggling. I call it the juggle struggle because I'm trying to help as many people as possible. I'm trying to advance my
yeah,
own interests and stay intellectually stimulated and like take care of my family and everything. And oh, you pile some COVID on top of it, pile some
yeah, yeah,
economic uncertainty on top of it. So I definitely feel those points that you were putting out there.
yeah.
So I know we're a little bit past halfway. Maybe we take a 20-second timeout and do like a lightning round. So it's just a fun little, we'll maybe ask 3 or 4 questions about, let's start with, you mentioned sports. So are you still following baseball? Are you like a Bay Area Giants or A's fan, or give us a sense of what sports you're currently following and into?
Well, yeah, I converted relatively quickly from a Dodger fan to a Giant fan. So, uh, uh, given what's going on at this moment, that's a very nervous time because the Giants are up by 1 with what, 10 to play or 12 to play or something. Personally, when I was working younger, I played a lot of tennis. I found that it's not as easy to play baseball when your team sports are logistically more difficult when you're get older. But tennis was kind of like, and as a pitcher, serving was, so I played a lot of tennis, which I can't do it anymore because of my knees, but I play sand volleyball.
Mhm.
So, and that's a similar thing. And it turns out sand is very forgiving on your knees and stuff. So I have a group of guys I play with a couple of women too, by the way, who we play on Sunday afternoons. When the weather's good, we play sand volleyball. So I still do that. Walk, hike. I took up golf after I retired, and I have sort of a love-hate relationship with golf, but I play that maybe once a week. So those are my main sporting activities.
Got it. Got it. Me and you might have to get out there. I tried to play last week in Monterey, and I tell people golf plays me more than I
Yeah,
play it. So
yeah. It's a crazy game, but when you hit a good shot, it feels great, though, huh?
yeah, those moments like I hit 100 shots, but that I hit like 2 good ones that I'll
Yeah,
remember forever. So it
remember
was all worth
that.
it.
Remember those. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe next lightning round question. Travel. A lot of people have been locked in and locked down because of COVID. Maybe a couple places that our folks who will listen in or watch this might consider going to, like places around the world that you might have been and really, really enjoyed with your wife and family, or maybe even solo trips.
My view on travel is the more the better. So I don't have any one. The last place I've been is probably my favorite place always, but I just think that I'm a big fan that we talked about learning, the
Mhm.
importance of learning, and there's no better way, in my view, to learn about the world than to travel and to meet people from different places
Yeah.
with different attitudes and different lifestyles. And so the one thing I've done a lot of, I traveled a lot when I was working, but it was all business, right? In
Yeah.
fact, my philosophy when I was working was to travel only as much as I had to, and
Mm.
not a day more, because I was much more interested in being with my family and
Yeah.
my life here. But when I retired, then my wife and I've done a lot of traveling, and I just, there isn't any one place. I just am a big fan of travel, and obviously we haven't been able to do much the last year,
Mhm.
but hopefully that'll change over the next couple of years. And I just think it's a better world when more different kinds of people come together and get to know one another.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe another lightning round question to ask about in that same vein. When I think of learning, I'm tuned into podcasts all the time. I'm reading
Yeah.
physical books. I'm listening to audio books. I'm watching stuff on YouTube and learning all the time. What are some resources or some ways that you kind of take in information and teach yourself new stuff and feel like you're kind of intellectually making progress as you move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like you. I love the podcast because I can go out for a walk and listen to a couple of podcasts. So I listen to many podcasts. I read books. I'm in a book club with a bunch of guys, which is a lot of fun. And I take classes. I take classes at Stanford Continuing Ed has a great program. So I like Coursera is just online stuff.
Mhm.
I'm taking a class right now in Coursera. So I just try to keep stimulated and learning and looking for books and classes that I would really enjoy. And then the great thing about book clubs, of course, is that you're sharing the same, experience, and so that leads to really great discussions and so forth. So those are probably the main things I do. I'm sort of a news hound. I've always been kind of a news hound, although these days the news is a little more problematic. But I grew up in LA, starting the day with the LA Times and going up the driveway and picking it up and crawling back into bed and reading it. So I still read a newspaper every day, which tells you I'm old. So I try to keep up with the news as well. But these days, like I say, news has gotten a little toxic. So too much, you don't want too much of that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't watched news on television for a very long time, but I can definitely relate to the newspapers. And I love the crossword puzzles and the comics and like all that kind of stuff growing up.
Yeah,
I haven't probably read a newspaper for a long time, but I remember those games as a kid. I really loved
yeah,
spending time and trying to figure out. Maybe that's where my engineering brain started to form as a 6, 7, 8 year old.
yeah.
So, yeah, maybe last lightning round question. Um, well, maybe be like future looking. So, like, think of what you hope for like your children or for your children's children. I mean, Jeff Bezos and SpaceX just went to outer space recently. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that we could be doing as a human race. And then you talked about, you know, news is a little bit problematic these days, and just the amount of information flowing at us being a little bit too difficult to handle. What are some, like, as you look out some years, things that you're hoping uh, maybe for greater society, or maybe as like for your family unit, so that you're feeling like you're leaving them in better hands than what we're in currently?
Well, I guess in general, I mean, when I think about my grandchildren, I have four now, age 2 to 12. I just hope they live in a world of peace and opportunity. Obviously, having my father killed in a war has really affected my attitude about
Yeah.
war and peace, and I just and then I think we're living at, this is not a unique insight of mine. We're living at a time where the opportunity gap and the wealth gap has never been greater, I think, or at least not in the last 100 years, not in my lifetime. And I just really feel strongly that we need to change that. And it's not easy. And, there are all these things in the way, but we absolutely have to find ways to make it so that our society, more people have more opportunity. I was actually listening to a podcast this morning, and someone made the point that the ultimate supply side fix for our problems is opportunity. In other words, if the more people we have who are educated and have enough food and have good health, we have more people who can help us address the problems and opportunities that we're going to face. And the extent to which we have fewer people who have opportunity, then we're less well prepared as a human race to address these challenges and opportunities. So I think we've got a lot of fundamental work to do to close that opportunity gap and give more. I look at myself, and I didn't grow up in the most difficult circumstances, but I grew up in a situation where you didn't have to be rich to go to good schools, to be able to afford to go to college, to be able to have opportunity. And I think it's harder and harder. I look at my kids and I now think about my grandkids. It's much harder now than it was when I was growing up for more people to have that opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. I look at, I remember the first job that I ever got was a caddy on a golf course. And I remember scrawny 12-year-old kid knocking on the caddy master's door saying, this honor caddy who lives in the same neighborhood as me said I'd be good at this. And it was like, all right, if Steve says you're good, then you're in. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and juxtapose that to being maybe a recent college grad who did their senior year in COVID times, and they're trying to apply for a job, first job at a company, and you're one of 1,000 resumes, and they'll never get to meet you like physically and in person. Like, just how different
Oh, yeah.
opportunity
And
gap looks today.
it seems to me now that, and I'm not directly involved in this, but it seems to me now that the hiring process has become turned into an algorithm, and basically you never talk to the people. I always used to say at HP, you want to hire the best people, not necessarily the very best person for the thing I want to do in the next month,
Mhm.
but the best person overall. And now it seems like everyone just wants to find the resume that's exactly what I'm looking for this instant. And so I think some of the automation of a lot of that stuff is actually detrimental, as you said, that Steve isn't around to tell anybody you should hire Brandon.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think the fact that people change too is also something that um, I don't know that hiring managers and like hiring departments are thinking a whole lot about just the potential of human beings, like to be given a shot, and then for the training programs that you talked about and the folks who are instrumental in like coaching you and helping to supplement what you already knew to help you be better and to take on more responsibilities. When you talked about culture building to make it so that the kind of folks that sit outside of the mainstream could be successful, like in your HP example, that's a personal kind of area of emphasis for me. And I think even conversations like this that people will watch and listen to, hopefully it'll stimulate more discussions about that, and we can find innovative ways to make some progress in the space. But it doesn't all have to be bleeding edge technical. Some of it is just like help another human being feel comfortable in a space, give them an opportunity, coach them through it.
Yeah.
And it won't be the sexiest thing, but it's effective, and people need to know that other people believe in them and are willing to take a risk on them and give them a shot, and will hold them accountable. And to that board story, what did you learn? And as long as you learn something, and you won't do that particular thing again,
Right.
this fear of retribution or this fear of being tossed out after one strike, I think some of those elements will make for a better kind of work environment than we've got, presently.
Yeah, and by the way, I think the same thing is true at the university level. When I was working at HP, I was assigned to USC because that's where I went to school, and they were working on these issues there about we can get these kids into school, into the engineering school, but they're not. Too many of them are dropping out.
Yeah.
And one of the main things they did that had a big impact was to find upper class mentors.
Mhm.
Who are like these kids, come from the same neighborhoods, have the similar backgrounds. You can say, yeah, I felt like that as a freshman too. It can be really tough. Here's what I did. Just make people realize that this is not unusual for things to be challenging, and how do you get through it? And that had a huge impact on their retention rates in the engineering school.
Yeah, I tried to do it all myself. Like, this is probably the last anecdote I'll throw out before we, start to wrap it up. But like, I did horrible my first semester in college because I tried to do it all myself. And I didn't know that it was better to, join forces with the National Society of Black Engineers, NSBE, and find sophomores and juniors and seniors taking the same classes that I'd taken, who come from the same neighborhoods as I come from, and just have somebody like be big brother, be big sister to me. And instead of dropping out, that first semester, I probably got a 1.8 or 1.9 or something horrible, got put on academic probation for electrical engineering. And then that second semester, people thought that I had like went back home or like dropped out, but they didn't see me because I was in the library until 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. when it closed. And right after classes was out, I went to tutoring every single day, whether I thought I needed it or didn't need it. And the difference between a 1.8 or 1.9 and the 3.6 or 3.7 that I got in the second semester was like the difference that I needed to see in order to, say to me that, your high school study habits are not going to cut it here, Brandon. You need to
Right,
do different things and like hang around with different people in order for you to be
right,
successful in this new context and in this new
right.
setting. So yeah, I agree 100%, man.
And look at you now.
I'm still trying. Well, at this point, I just want to, again, from our community to yours, say I really enjoyed having this conversation, and thank you for being given of your time to give back to the community college community here, and to again just share some gems and some things that people can pick up and put in their back pocket so that they can get to where they're going faster. I'll give the floor to you to give one or last two things to say. If you were to ask the question, what would you say, Webb, to everybody who's listening? If they don't get but one or two things from our conversation today, what are a couple of things that you would have them walk away with?
Oh boy. Well, first of all, thank you for asking me to be part of the program. I think what you're doing is outstanding, and it's hard for me to come up with one or two things. When I look back at my life and the importance that of a small number of influencers. In my case, my grandmothers. Believe it or not, I mean my one grandmother, my father's mother, took in laundry for a living. She was a hardworking, kind of tough old coot, kind of person. And she was, but she taught me the importance of hard work. And that's one of the things you just were mentioning, Brandon, is that your high school might have to study harder in college than you did in high school, right? So from her, I got this sense that you things aren't given to you in life. You have to earn them, and you have to work hard, and that you have to do things the right way. And my other grandmother, who just impressed on me the importance of education and how important that was going to be to my life and future, and gave me the confidence to think that I could do that. And I was fortunate that in my family, I wasn't a first generation kid going to college. I did have other role models. I didn't know them; they'd all passed away. But I, she would talk about, well, your grandfather and your great grandfather and what they had done, and so it kind of helps build that confidence. And then this one great teacher I had at community college, Art Flum, my calculus teacher, he just inspired me to fight through the tough times and to give you the confidence. So I think hopefully everyone can find that mentor that or two or three that can help inspire you, and you can do it. You can accomplish things you would never imagine.
Yeah. That's a mic drop moment right there. I feel like that's a perfect way to end it this afternoon. And again, from our community to yours and your family, thank you. And yeah, we're hoping to see everybody in the next version of the Green Room here at the community college. But until next time, thank you, Webb, so much. Thank you to everybody that's watching, and have a good one.